The Philadelphia Eagles have an offensive meltdown against the Giants this past Sunday. The Sixers have lost the past 7 out of 10 games, and the Philadelphia Flyers are on a 7-game losing streak. Not a good week to be a Philly sports fan. All that coming to you on Sports Talk Philadelphia. Hello and welcome back to Sports Talk Philadelphia. I'm your host for another week, Caleb Flieger. I'm joined by my co-producer, Aiden Tasinski. Hi, Aiden. How you doing?
Doing all right. We'll talk about it.
We have a new face to the table, Siobhan Nolan. How are you doing?
I'm great, considering I'm a Union fan, so I'm chilling right now.
And we got Shane Nolan back for another episode. Shane?
Oh.
We're going to jump right into the Philadelphia Eagles as they blew an opportunity to get back in the NFC race as they lost to the New York Giants 13-7, where it was just an ugly offensive performance for the Eagles. Took a big step back after the past couple weeks where they were putting up good points as Jalen Hurts, 14-31, 129 passing yards and 3 interceptions. Probably his worst game as an NFL quarterback. Boston Scott had a decent game, the Giant killer, 15 carries for 64 yards. He did have a touchdown, but he had a crucial fumble on the second to last drive of the game where the Eagles were marching. Big opportunity lost there. And Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert were only targeted 7 times total between the both of them. And Jalen Reagor, who we'll get to that later, had 7 total targets for the game, where you'd think that Jalen Reagor wouldn't be going into this game getting 7 targets when 2 of your best offensive weapons are only getting 7 targets the entire game, Aiden.
Yeah, no, it just really doesn't make any sense why we're not targeting them more. I really just can't explain it. The fact that you have a rookie quarterback, you know that his best weapons is going to be the wide receiver that played with him in college for a little bit and one of the best tight ends that you've had in a while, and you just don't use them at all. It really doesn't make any sense. And Jalen Reagor does not deserve those opportunities. We'll get into Jalen Reagor later, but I do think that the Eagles really messed up with who they were targeting this week.
Now let's jump back to Jalen Hurts real quick. He did not have his best game, as you can tell. 3 interceptions, where he only had 5 interceptions the entire season coming into this game. And having 3 in one game, I mean, one coming in before the first half ended where there was about 7 seconds on the clock. Eagles had no timeouts, and he ended up throwing an interception where the Eagles could have taken 3 points there and went into tied at halftime. How crucial and how bad was Jalen Hurts' performance this past Sunday?
Yeah, I'm just going to say this. Yes, Boston Scott had a game-losing fumble. Yes, we then got the ball back, and then Jalen Reagor had the game-winning drop. This loss is on Jalen Hurts. The fact that you have 8 seconds left before halftime, game-tying drive on the line, you throw the ball into triple coverage and it gets picked up. Why don't you just throw the ball out of bounds, go for the field goal, go for the touchdown on 4th down? If you don't get it, then this loss is on Sirianni. To start the second half, the Giants have score a touchdown, go up 10-0. Then Jalen Hurts throws another interception into double coverage. He just did not look on his game, and frankly, it makes me concerned that if you're going to have games like this, I know that this is the first one in his career that has been this bad, but just some of his passes, he put no strength on the ball. He just aired it out into double coverage. It made it seem like that we had top 10 wide receivers that were getting able to catch it, which, by the way, we don't. And it just makes me question what his decision-making is and if he can be the quarterback going into the future after the season.
Yeah, the Eagles' passing game definitely didn't look stellar this past Sunday, but the rushing game, for a 4th consecutive week, rushed for over 200 yards in a game. The Eagles had 208 rushing yards this past Sunday, where if you watch the tape, the Eagles' offensive line was just straight out dominating the Giants' defensive line, where you'd think if you're Nick Sirianni, you keep doing it until they stop it. I mean, you saw later in the game where they stopped passing the ball as much. They were running the ball 5, 6, 7 times in a row. And I actually think on the touchdown drive, they ran the ball 7 times straight down the field and scored a touchdown. So you want to talk about how important the Eagles' rush game has been for them during this stretch of games here and how they can go forward and utilize it even more.
Yeah, well, I mean, when you have a young quarterback like Jalen Hurts, someone who I don't think is that great at throwing the football, you need to have a good run game. And so far, the Eagles have used that really well to their advantage. Boston Scott, who basically came out of nowhere again this year, has been really solid for them. Now that we've got Sanders back, he had a pretty solid game for the limited touches that he had. I'd like to see more. I understand that he was hurt, so maybe they're easing their way back into it. But next week, he's got to have over 10 carries. This week, he only had 9, so that wasn't too great. And once you get Jordan Howard back, too, that's a 3-headed rushing monster that the Eagles could really utilize to make their way past this week, maybe try to push their way into the playoffs.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially with the Eagles' offensive line, where you have arguably two of the best left and right tackles in the game in Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson. But you also have Jason Kelsey, who is a veteran, and you saw him get hurt in that game Sunday, and he grilled it out and came back in after Nate Herbig went in, and he had two big offensive holding penalties, one of them that called a Boston Scott touchdown back. You just want to talk about a little bit how tough Jason Kelsey is. I mean, he's done this throughout his whole entire career. I mean, he is probably one of the toughest players to put on an Eagles uniform. And Nick Sirianni even texted him after the game and said, "You gave me goosebumps because of how tough you are in that game." So describe a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of time where a city absolutely falls in love with an offensive lineman. The city of Philadelphia loves Jason Kelsey. And frankly, it is rightfully deserved. Dressing as a mummer during the Super Bowl parade, just letting out one of the best Super Bowl speeches of all time. But then the fact of how well he plays, the offense clearly changed the moment that he went out of the game. He's a core piece of the offensive line, and he needs to stay healthy if the Eagles want to be successful.
Hey, going on to the Eagles' defense, they did only allow 13 points this past Sunday. I mean, but it wasn't a very impressive stat sheet, as they only had one sack that came late in the game by Javon Hargrave. And the big thing is 0 turnovers forced, where Daniel Jones is averaging 1.5 turnovers per game. And you have to think, when you win the turnover battle, which the Eagles have done in the previous weeks, you win football games. And that's the key point Merrill Reese says every week, win the turnover battle. And the Eagles did not, as they gave the ball up 4 times and had 0 turnovers, but still had a chance at the end of the game. How do you rank the Eagles' defensive performance this past Sunday?
So I think the biggest thing for the Eagles' defense is when you look at how many rushing yards they allowed. This is something that the Eagles really struggled with. Their defensive line did not look great at the beginning of the season. This week they only allowed 70 rushing yards, which doesn't seem too great when you take in the 0 turnovers first, but this is also, you have Daniel Jones, who's one of the best running quarterbacks in the NFL. You have Saquon Barkley, who even though he's been hurt and hasn't looked great, is still a very dangerous runner. So to hold the Giants to that amount of rushing yards is the key reason why they were in this game so late. I think if they had forced at least 1 or 2 turnovers, they would have won, but the Giants just had a better game plan against our defense than we anticipated it looked like.
We are going to talk about the end of the game and bring back up Jalen Reagor, as Jalen Hurts was struggling passing the ball at the end of the game, but he had 2 very good throws towards the end of the game that could have put the Eagles above the Giants by a point and win the game. Let's go a little season statistics on Jalen Reagor in his second season as a player. 25 catches for 201 yards and 2 touchdowns currently. He was drafted in the first round, 21st overall last year, 1 spot ahead of Justin Jefferson, who just won Offensive Player of the Month. Jalen Reagor, only 3 career touchdown catches and 1 punt return TD. I mean, this is ending up to being one of the biggest busts in Philadelphia history, especially because you have to look at Justin Jefferson, who the Eagles passed on and was right behind, and he's a top 5 receiver in the NFL right now. So, and he had those 2 key drops at the end of the game. I mean, they touched his hand. Like, those are passes that an NFL wide receiver has to make.
Oh, no, absolutely, especially if you're in the first round. I will say Jalen Reagor should not be considered a bust in my mind because he should have never been a first-round pick. It's not on Jalen Reagor to play up to standards that he could not be. The earliest he was projected was second round, and frankly, I think he was probably going to fall to the third. If he had fallen there, had that stats, I would have said, okay, he could be a little bit better, but that's not terrible. We gave him too high of expectations, the Eagles did, and that's really not on Reagor to play up to that. That's on Howie Roseman for, again, selecting a guy who should not be where he is, and for the Eagles putting Reagor in positions that he should not be in because he is just not that good.
Yeah, Nick Sirianni keeps saying after the games is one thing that stands out in practice is his explosiveness. Well, I don't think we've seen that at all in the past 2 years with Jalen Reagor in a game. So moving on to the NFC East standings here, the Cowboys, who have lost the past 3 out of 4 games and made this a race again, are now 7-4 on the season. The Washington football team have won 3 games in a row. They're 5-6. The Eagles, with a crucial loss this past Sunday, fall to 5-7. And the Giants, who picked one up on the Eagles, are now 4-7. The Eagles, I mean, they are currently 1 spot out of the wild card spot. But Aiden, with the Cowboys losing the past 3 out of 4, and they do play the New Orleans Saints tonight on Thursday Night Football, do you think there is a chance that somewhat the Eagles can make a race at this thing?
The only way the Eagles can make the playoffs at this point is 2 key games at the end of the season. You've got 2 games home and away against Washington. Washington's currently in second. If Dallas keeps losing, I can see Washington winning this division. In fact, I predicted Washington to win this division earlier in the offseason. So I do think if the Eagles win both those games, the way the Cowboys are playing, they could make the playoffs and possibly win the division. If If you lose both those games to Washington, it doesn't really matter what you do against the Giants, what you do against the Jets, what do you do against the Cowboys. You're already out of it at that point. So they really need to win those games against Washington.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, especially dropping a division game this past Sunday against the Giants. The Eagles do have a favorable schedule on the rest of the way. They have the Jets this upcoming Sunday, who are 3-8, and they just do not look like a good football team. They are 4th in the AFC East division. The Eagles, they have a bye week after this week, so the Eagles can get some rest and get their guys rested for the stretch of these games. The Jets, they are 1-3 in the last 4 games. They've been beaten by the Titans and the Bengals. Looking at it, Zach Wilson, he is a little banged up, the rookie quarterback for the Jets. We're not sure if he's going to suit up yet. He is questionable, but we could see a little Joe Flacco action coming in here as the Eagles traded him midway through the season. Aiden, what are some successful points that the Eagles need to hit to get back in the win column this Sunday?
Yeah, I would say it really depends on the quarterback that they play against. If Zach Wilson does end up suiting up, he has 10 interceptions this year. Again, the Eagles really struggle to get any turnovers against the Giants, so you've got to get those turnovers against a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, I completely agree. A little score prediction before we go. I have the Eagles winning a blowout in this one, 38-7. I feel like there's going to get a lot of turnovers this game, and the offense is going to get back on track.
I'll go 37, Eagles.
Well, we're going to jump right into Sixers talk, who have not been so hot lately either, as they've dropped the past 7 out of their 10 games. Joel Embiid, he has returned back from the COVID-19 list. He has played the last 3 games, but if you take a look at the Sixers' past 10 games, just not good stuff, and especially if you look at the Timberwolves game where they lost in double overtime at home, and then last night where they lost by a point to the Celtics. Just overall not good as the Sixers. They are 11-11 on the season right now currently. Just overall not looking good. I mean, Embiid in that Timberwolves game, he did have 42 points in the game where it looked like the Sixers were going to come away with the victory at home. The fans they brought their energy, but they just couldn't pull it out. And then, Aiden, what do you think is the Sixers' problem right now?
I think the biggest thing, we talked about this a lot on the show this year, it's just been health, especially COVID protocols. You have so many key guys going in. Martise Thybulle, we said best defender on the Sixers, he's been out. Embiid finally came back. He looked great against the Timberwolves, did not look good in that loss last night. So I think it's just with COVID, you don't really know what you're going to get out of these guys. It really depends. Like, I feel like Embiid exhausted himself against the Timberwolves and just was too tired to play against the Celtics. I think that's a big issue with COVID. You just aren't going to know how guys are feeling after they get it.
Yeah, the Sixers, in the beginning of the season, before all these COVID issues, they were number 1 in the Eastern Conference. Now they have fallen to the bottom. They're not even in the playoffs currently. Siobhan, what do you think the Sixers can do to get back on track?
I think they really need to take advantage of the fact that they have a fully healthy team now, because you could kind of make excuses when Embiid and Thybulle and everyone were in protocols and there wasn't a distinct timeline of when they were coming back. But now that they have a fully healthy team, and now that Embiid is kind of slowly returning to his form, the 42 points was a standout game, but slowly but surely he's getting better. You just have to take advantage of that and play to everyone's strengths, because this season's really going downhill, but I think they can still turn it around. They just have to really work to turn it around.
Now, the Sixers did lose a heartbreaking game last night to the Boston Celtics in Boston, 88-87. Another game where the Sixers were 1 possession away from winning that game. Joel Embiid that game, 3-17 for 13 points. Not a very good outing for the big man. And then you have Tobias Harris, who recently came back from his injury. He was only 4 of 11 for 8 points, and just two players where they are your best players on the team, and those are just not numbers they need to be putting up for the Sixers to win games, Aiden.
Yeah, no, the starters last night did not play well. Biggest stat that I saw out of the starters is that they went 6 for 21 of 3-pointers. That's 28%. That's way below league average. And a big reason why they lost that game, if you just made just 1 shot there, you're in a great position. You would have won the game if you had made one of those shots. So really the starters just have to step it up at this point. I don't really know what happened in this one, because they have been scoring a lot at different points this season, but last night was just a clunker, honestly.
Yeah, you'd have to think that since all these Sixers were injured or on the COVID list, it is going to take some time to get that chemistry back. Siobhan, how long do you think it's going to take for the Sixers to get their mojo back, or do you think this is going to be something that just is a flip of the switch overnight?
I mean, I don't think it's going to happen overnight. I honestly don't think that the Sixers have enough drive and, frankly, talent to make that happen overnight. I hate to put it on the whole process thing, because I think we're honestly way past the process at this point, but they need to they do need to do it overnight, but I think it's going to take a lot longer than that, and I really don't see a playoff run happening, and if they do somehow squeak in, I don't see it lasting very long. So this is going to be chalked up to another learning season, I think, and that's not what we need, and that's not acceptable for a Sixers team of this caliber, but I don't think that they're going to turn it around fast enough to actually put on another successful playoff run this season.
Yeah, you've seen over the past stretch of these Sixers games, the Sixers have only lost by one possession in multiple of these games, which you'd have to think that the Sixers are lacking a closer, which they had a few years ago with Jimmy Butler, where he hit multiple game-winning shots in that short span that the Sixers had him for. So you'd have to think that not having a closer, I mean, going back to that Timberwolves game, the last play of the game, the Sixers had 4 seconds. They throw it to the Embiid on the three-point line. I mean, what type of play is that, having a 7'2" big man on the three-point line with 4 seconds left? That just shows that the Sixers have no guys that can create their own shot and get a bucket when you need it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it seems like a lot of the guys that are considered closers aren't really on the trade block. James Harden might be at the end of the season. That doesn't really help us now. There are a few guys that are open that could be traded. John Wall's the biggest name, except he just got hurt again. I would say if the Sixers are going to bring anyone in at this point, it's got to be Christian Wood. Former Sixer, actually part of the process for literally like 16 games and then got traded. But this year he's really stepped it up, especially after last year with the Detroit Pistons, averaging 16 points per game, 34 three-point percentage, 11.2 rebounds per game as well. So I really think if the Sixers are going to get anyone, it's got to be him.
You'd have to think it hurts the Sixers that they have their max contract. Ben Simmons still sitting on the bench, not participating in anything. You'd have to think that Daryl Morey is watching this team and he's thinking he's got to get a player somewhat in return soon, especially as we're getting longer into the season. So, players aren't going on the trade block like you said. So not a lot of players the Sixers can trade for. Not a good scenario for the Sixers currently. We're going to dive into the Eastern Conference standings as the Sixers are now 11-11 on the season, like I said earlier. They're now 11th place in the conference standings, 3 spots out of the playoffs. They're currently not in a playoff spot, which is kind of surprising people, Aiden or Siobhan. Do you think the Sixers will make the playoffs?
I really don't. And again, like I said, if they do, they're not going to go very far, which is very disappointing because they do have a lot of the talent and they do have the capabilities, which we've seen. But, if you're just going to pass to Joel Embiid every time you're in a tight spot, that's not going to win you games and that's not going to get you where you want to be in the playoffs. So this year, I don't think it's going to happen.
Yeah, we're hoping the Sixers turn it around soon, but we're going to jump right into Philadelphia Flyers talk. The Flyers have not been so hot either, as they've dropped the past 7 straight games. That is the most under their current head coach, Alain Vigneault. I think that's how you say his name.
Yeah.
What is happening to this team? I mean, if you look at the past 7 games, they've given up a lot of goals. I mean, they've averaged, I think it is around 4.5 goals per game in those losses. I mean, your goalies can just not allow that to happen to win games, right, Shane?
I mean, yeah, the goalies can't allow that to happen, but also it's not their fault. I mean, the defense is allowing a lot of high-quality, dangerous shots, especially ones that are like in the middle, in the slot. There's a lot on the penalty kill they're allowing, and their defense is allowing in the last 5 games before last night when they played the Rangers, they allowed 45, 35, 45, 36, and 35 shots against. That's last in the league. And I mean, this year we thought that they cleaned up their defense because they allowed the most shots last year in the league too. And right now, that's what they're doing right now. So.
Yeah, this is looking a lot like the Philadelphia Flyers from last year, where they missed the playoffs and just completely collapsed during that COVID-19 season. I want to open this up now. The Flyers are now 8-9-4 on the season. What can the Philadelphia Flyers improve on?
I mean, obviously the defense has just been the big thing lately, and so you'd think that knowing how bad it is that they do more to, rectify. But I think the offense can also use some fixing because Travis Konechny, where has he been this season? He was the top scorer. He was the all-star last season, and he's kind of disappeared. The offense and really the Flyers in general have been falling on the very young shoulders of Joel Farabee. And I love Joel Farabee. I think he's very capable of doing it, but it shouldn't have to fall on him to carry such an experienced defense when you have players like Van Riemsdyk, Konechny, Giroux. It's great that Joel Farabee's getting that moment in the spotlight and proving to the fans that he can handle that pressure, but he shouldn't have to, especially not amongst the extremely experienced and, somewhat talented and capable, even though a lot of them are getting older. Again, it shouldn't have to fall on a 21-year-old to carry that offense.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with pretty much everything Siobhan said. We have to start relying on some of our other guys. And going back to Shane's point, too, we've just been allowing way too many shots on defense. Overall, this season, it's 34 shots per game that we're allowing. But as Shane pointed out, it's really gone up dramatically in these last couple games. I hope Ryan Ellis can get back at the end of December. I think that would improve our defense a lot. But at this point, he's only played 4 games, and no one really knows when he comes back how well he's going to be. So we'll see.
Shane, I'll go back to you. If this continues for the Flyers and this losing streak continues, what can the Flyers do to turn this around? I mean, this is now 2 straight seasons where the Flyers are dramatically underperforming.
I mean, I don't want to say it because, for the past couple of years, they have fired plenty of coaches, and you want to put it on the players. But AV's system is just not working with this team. When he coached with the Rangers in Vancouver, he's a defensive-minded coach, and their teams are all defense, and both of those teams that he coached previously had great goaltending. And granted, Carter Hart's only 22, but the Flyers, they're just not a defensive-minded team. And all their defensemen just jump up on the play and everything, and they're all about offense and everything. So, you have to make a coaching change soon if this continues.
Do you think there's any possible trades that could happen? I mean, is there any firepower that the Flyers could pick up possibly?
Honestly, I've always been a big proponent of utilizing the young guys because they have a lot of really, really good young guys. They've drafted very well over the past couple of years. So, I honestly don't see who would even want to come to the Flyers in a state like this. So you got to utilize your guys in Lehigh because, like I said, a lot of the current team is getting older. And at the end of the day, you have so much talent sitting down there. You have Cam York especially. He's an amazing defenseman. He can score points too. And, with Carter Hart, I know that he's only 22, but I can't give him a grace period anymore. So you need to utilize the goalies that you have down there. You need to give Joel Farabee some of his peers to be on a line with instead of guys that are out of his league offensively and have played on a million different teams, whereas he's only been with the Flyers and he only knows the Flyers way. So I'm a big proponent of just, keeping it kind of in the family and bringing people up from Lehigh.
Yeah, the Flyers are going to jump into the standings. They are now 7th place in the Metropolitan Division. Not where Flyers fans want to see them sit, and they are 8-9-4 on the season. Aiden, is there any way that the Flyers can turn this around and be a playoff team this year after a rough season last year?
Biggest thing for being a playoff team, you've got to beat teams that are over 500. This year, the Flyers are 4-7-3 in games in that situation. So basically, they're 4-10 because they've lost 3 overtime games. They've got to learn how to close out games in overtime, too. I think that's one of the biggest things. But just beating these playoff teams as well will help them get into the playoffs. They haven't really shown that. They've beaten up on the worst teams, which I guess is good, but that doesn't really give me a whole lot of faith as you get into this later stretch in the season.
Siobhan, do the Flyers make the playoffs this year?
I think, they have a habit of getting really hot when they're at the very last wire and, they really need to, but I don't think it's going to be enough, especially after this run of form and the fact that it doesn't show any signs of letting up anytime soon. So I think that they'll have a promising moment where it'll look like they can squeak in, but again, I just think they're going to miss it this year.
That's all we have for the Philadelphia Flyers this week. Hopefully they can also turn it around like the Eagles and the Sixers. Now we're going to jump into Fast Five, and the first question we have for the week is this weekend in college basketball with Caleb Fleer. Now I'm going to focus on the Duke Blue Devils as they played Gonzaga, who was number 1 previously. They beat a great game, obviously. It was 84-81 in the game. Just 2 super teams going at each other. Duke then, after they beat Gonzaga, overtook that number 1 spot, and then 4 days later played Ohio State, who's not even ranked. They're 5-2 on the season now. They lost to Ohio State in Ohio, 71-66, where you just have to think it was a complete shock for not only Blue Devils fans, but for that team after you just go in there and you beat the number 1 team and then you go and lose to an unranked team. It shows how unpredictable college basketball is, and there can be major upsets that happen in college. And obviously it's just a big bounce back year for the Blue Devils as they did not make the NCAA tournament last year for the first time in forever. So it has been a good bounce back year for the Blue Devils as they look to get back in the NCAA championship, in the NCAA tournament, not championship. We're going to go to Aiden for the next one, the best NFL team through 12 weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to a team that we've been talking about all season. I'm going to go with the Arizona Cardinals. Yes, they struggled a little bit. They lost a blowout to the Panthers 34-10, but that was also without Kyler Murray. With Kyler Murray, they've been 7-0 this year. After this bye week, they play the Bears this next weekend, who won against the Lions, but it was just a horrible Thanksgiving game. I expect the Cardinals to blow out there. They'll be 10-2. top of the NFC in conference and a probable 1 seed going into the playoffs.
Next, we're going to go to an NFL MVP through the first 12 weeks of the season. I'm going to go with the Indianapolis Colts running back, second-year player Jonathan Taylor, as he's just been putting up killer numbers as he has 1,200 rushing yards, which is number 1 in the NFL. Also, 14 touchdowns, where you'd think that he's just putting that Indianapolis Colts offense on their back, as they have had a few injury problems at the wide receiver position with T.Y. Hilton being on and off the field. That team does not have a true wide receiver corps, but Jonathan Taylor, as he can do it on the ground and he can do it through the air. So spectacular season so far for Jonathan Taylor, and only a second-year player. So his upside's only going to go higher as he plays more games. We're going to jump to the next question, and not really a question, but this week in free agency baseball with Aiden.
Yeah, so with the lockout that came, I was expecting for free agency to be a little bit quiet. Actually, the opposite happened. With the lockout coming, teams wanted to sign the best players possible before they couldn't. Some crazy things happened. The Detroit Tigers, who were one of the worst teams in baseball last year, signed one of the best shortstop, second baseman in baseball, signing Javier Baez to a 7-year, multi-million-dollar contract. The Mets picked up one of the best pitchers in baseball, signing Max Scherzer to a 3-year, $130 million contract, which means they'll have one of the best rotations in the National League. Not going to be fun for the Phillies to play against. And the Phillies did sign at least one guy, signing Corey Kimball to a couple-year deal from the Dodgers. It's just crazy what happened. Unfortunately, the lockout came. It will stop all those free agents. So it's going to be interesting once the lockout ends where guys like Chris Bryant and Carlos Correa will end up.
Next, we're going to jump to the best team currently in the NBA, and I got to go with the Phoenix Suns, who did have that final appearance last year and did lose, but they're having a great season once again as they're 18-3 on the season. They're on a 17-game win streak, the longest in the NBA currently, and they won all 16 games in the month of November. Just an overall great performance by the Phoenix Suns, as they have a lot of their players back from that team last year that made the finals, as you have Devin Booker and Chris Paul leading the team. And you also have players like Mikal Bridges that the Sixers traded. But they also have DeAndre Ayton, a lot of role players on that team that can get it done. And obviously it's showing as they won 17 straight games. That's all we have this week for you guys for Fast 5, and that's all we have for Sports Talk Philadelphia. Don't forget to follow us on our social media pages on Twitter and Instagram at Sports Talk LTV. And want to thank you guys for coming through and watching again. We'll be back next week for our last episode of the semester to talk more Philadelphia pro sports.